Hey everybody, Shabbat Shalom. It's great to see all of you. So today for Parshat Va'era, second Torah portion in the book of Exodus, I want to follow the lead of Aviva Zornberg and see Moses, the people of Israel, and Pharaoh as different forms of resistance to speech. As you know, one of Aviva Zornberg's favorite Hasidic authors, as is mine, is the Sfat Emet, which means the words of truth. So here's that we have that sense that words of truth are being spoken to Moses, to the people of Israel, to Pharaoh, and they all have their resistance to these words. For Moshe, the resistance is both to hearing God and to speaking the words. For the people, a resistance to listening and to the words and hearing the words, as well as to Pharaoh. And an undercurrent that Aviva Zornberg mentions only in passing is the trauma of the divine, that the word can't get through. Now, the deeper Kabbalistic and Hasidic background is called the Galut Hadibur. The Hebrew word Galut means exile, but in the Hasidic sense, in Kabbalistic sense, it doesn't mean an actual physical exile, but in the sense of something being dramatically out of place. And when something is dramatically out of place, it is misshapen. So the word of God in Galut b'Mitzrayim has a sense that the Dibur, by the way, which is a rabbinic word for revelation from the book of Jeremiah, you should know that the 10 Commandments in Hebrew are known in the book of Deuteronomy as Aseret HaMitzvot, but in Talmudic literature, they are called Aseret HaDibrot. A Dibur is a revelation from the divine. So the idea of Galut HaDibur, somehow the voice of God that speaks within us goes into a state of exile where the word cannot be spoken clearly, the word is distorted. The word, you might say, a spark of truth goes into a husk of deception, of lie, etc. So the theme that Zornberg presents throughout this, completely in line with Hasidic thought and in line with Kabbalistic thought and even parts of Rabbinic thought, is the idea of Galut Hadibur, the exile of the revelatory speech statement. And then we have these three paradigms of Galut Hadibur, the exile of the divine word in Moses, in the Israelites, and with Pharaoh. And then on the divine side, you might say the divine trauma, the divine pain that the word can't get through. Now, from a Hasidic Kabbalistic perspective, Galut Hadibur is also an analogous to the Sitra Achra, to the evil, demonic, destructive forces in the world. So the divine bringing Israel out of Egypt from Galut to Har Sinai, from Galut HaDibur to the actual giving of Dibur at Har Sinai, is an historical story, as it were, a biblical story, as it were, that refers to the journey of every human being out of Mitzrayim, out of Galut HaDibur, a stage-by-stage process into that moment of Mount Sinai, at least theoretically, where there's this clear connection between the human being and the divine. By the way, this is one of the Kabbalistic Hasidic understandings of why there had to be 10 plagues. Now remember, you can't analogously just place this right on top of the text. It's a Kabbalistic Hasidic concept that the Israelites had gone down into several levels of tum'ah, several levels of impurity, several levels of galut, and therefore had to be drawn out incrementally one step at a time. So each of the 10 plagues is understood in Kabbalah and Hasidism as the divine, as it were, in warfare with the Sitra Achra, striking at the Sitra Achra as a way to bring the human being into consciousness. Just another introductory word. How is this analogous to the human being? Coming into consciousness and being people of consciousness and people of truth is a very difficult and painful process. This is something that might not be everywhere in theories of enlightenment. In some places, when one becomes conscious, one moves into light and love and into an increasing sense of grace. I think that's true, at least some of the time. But in a Kabbalistic Hasidic framework, the movement from exile, from darkness into light, is a very painful movement. And the reason is every level of the Sitra Achra, of the demonic forces, every level of the Yetzer Hara, the grip of the destructive patterns, moving through each of these grips is a process of pain, because there's some grip on us that actually is being, as it were, ripped off, and the Yetzer Hara wants to hold on to us. So every level is a struggle. So the Hasidic Kabbalistic movement toward consciousness, truth, and revelation is a process of warfare. It's a process of pain. It's a process of inner transformation that sometimes leaves us feeling in greater loss, but it's the loss of as it were, an old self that does not want to give up easily. So I'll introduce my talk on Parshat Va'era with a line that Sfat Emet points out. I'm not sure if it's in the Midrash. I believe it is, but not in the context that we're going to use. Let me share with you the line, and then I'll share with you the Midrash context that I don't want to focus on. Then I'll take us to the journey for this morning. The line is from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 7. It says, Kol ha'oshek yeholel hacham, oppression makes the wise foolish. Ha'oshek yeholel hacham, this is Leviticus 7:7. Oppression makes the wise foolish. And the second half is, V'abed et lev matana. So this is the strangeness of Hebrew syntax. Matana, a gift, ye'abed et halev, makes the heart go astray. Ye'abed means to go astray or to perish. What a strange idea. The first one makes sense, that oppression makes the wise person foolish. It's a very deep idea. And a matana leaves the heart astray. The second one is not as strange as it seems, because a matana, a gift, as it were, something that improves our lives, whether from without, it gives us a sense of ease. And you'll see in the book of Ecclesiastes and in Hasidic literature as well, sometimes the sense of ease, a matana, makes us unwary of the traps and pitfalls of life. So every time there is a matana, one receives the matana, one receives the blessing, one receives the gift, but one also stays wary. And it's a sense of the bribing of a court official. It says in the book of Deuteronomy, it distorts the ways of the righteous. That when a judge is bribed, even if a person says this is in the Talmud, Judge, what a nice paraphrasing. Judge, what a nice tie you have on today. Judge, I love that outfit. Even a word like that can be understood as bribery, because it is a sense to have the judge kindly disposed toward you. In Talmudic literature, people do this to each other all the time. We want to get in people's good graces. We want to give them the gift of praise. And by the way, praise is a true gift. The question is it intentional? Is it an intentional gift? Or is it as it were, a deceptive gift to change someone's consciousness? So there's a lot of wisdom in all of the Bible and all of Ecclesiastes and 7:7. But this idea that oppression makes the wise foolish. And here's what happens. When a person is wise but squeezed in from the outside, we can become rigid. We can become dogmatic. We can revert to slogans because it is so hard to stay conscious when life squeezes you in. Either your own inner life, I say our political, cultural lives, when you feel you or your group feels squeezed in, we revert to ideologies and slogans. It happens in our interpersonal lives. So the wise becomes foolish when there's oshek, or oppression. And then, of course, it takes great will and wisdom to push back against the forces of oppression and regain our wisdom. Now, how's this used in the Talmud, by the way, in the Midrash? You'll find this interesting, then I'll move forward. In the Midrash, this is playfully connected with the word esek, oshek. Ashuk means oppressed. Esek means business. And the rabbis of the Talmud have a constant struggle with being a community leader. Let's say the active rabbi today, the active congregational rabbi in public affairs, let's say the Federation, the different Jewish organizations. This is called esek, community leadership. And one of the rabbis complains, this is bizarre, but I want to add a word to it. Rabbi used to say, I knew 60 halachot. I used to know 60 laws concerning a grave in a plowed field. What a strange idea. I can't even imagine what those 60 laws might be. So in the Midrash, a rabbi says, I used to know 60 laws about a grave in a plowed field, but since I became a community leader, I've forgotten all of them. I used to know 60 laws of a grave in a plowed field. Since I became a community leader, esek, I've forgotten all of them. And that's the rabbinic connection to oshek, oppression, which for them is being involved in community affairs makes you lose your learning. What is this learning? I just have to jump at the obvious. The learning is the inevitability of death, the sense that we don't have enough time, the sense that we don't lead lives of nobility and dignity and truth because we're not aware that an end is facing us, and there will be one day when you have nothing else to say. There'll be one day when the learning is over, when the growth is over, when the path in this existence is over. But we live as if there will not be a day when you will not be able to say another word in this realm, where there'll be nothing else to learn in this realm because your learning has ended. So you get the sense from the rabbi, when I think of the 60 laws of the grave, he says, I forgot I'm going to die. I got so busy taking care of things. I forgot that I have a soul. I forgot that I'm on my way to my death. I forgot that there's one day that my learning is wrapped up. I'm not going to have any more time to study because my time will be over. So that's a very deep thing. Maybe I'll talk about another time. I read it. I was stunned. I didn't have a place to put it into my Devar Torah for today, but I wanted to share this with you. It's on the Midrash to this Torah portion. Now, going back to starting with our Parshat Va'era, with the and again following Aviva Zornberg's 3 paradigms. In my Shabbat thought, I began with last week's Torah portion, and in last week's Torah portion, Parshat Shemot, we already have, you might say, the overture, the leitmotif of Moses' resistance. So I wrote in my Shabbat thought that we all remember the revelation at the burning bush, where the angel speaks out of the heart of the fire. God calls Moses to his mission, and then Moses, as you recall, at the very end, verse 11, after God has given Moses a great introduction, Moses says in chapter 3, verse 11, "Vayomer Moshe el ha'Elohim, mi anochi ke'elech el paro." Who am I that I should go? Well, God eventually says something like the following: you're the guy I'm talking to. You're not just some random person that I came along and I asked you, and if you don't want, I'll go to somebody else. So Moses doesn't want to do it. So when he says, who am I? Remember, that's that false rhetorical question, which means go to somebody else. And there's great resistance on the part of Moses to accepting this mission. Zornberg points out in the Midrash that the resistance goes on for days and days. Zornberg actually quotes from Hamidrash Hagadol, where the divine becomes infuriated with Moses, where the divine says, I've seen their suffering. I've seen their pain. I want to get them out. this is terrible oppression. And Moses says, fine, send anybody you want. Meaning, yeah, if it's me, so whatever, it is I. Send anybody you want. And the divine is offended by this. Zornberg brings this down in her chapter. So this is her introduction to the trauma of the divine, that the divine assumes, somewhat like the Midrash on Abraham. There's a question on the Midrash on Genesis 12:1, when it says, and God said to Avram, Lech lecha. God said to Avram, Lech lecha, go, and Avram goes. And the Midrash asks, Lemaha davar domeh, what is this like? To a person who comes upon a burning city. Now, we don't know if it's actually on fire in the Midrash or burning with sin, burning with pain. Obviously, I'm projecting some of what I think, alienation, corruption. And Avram says, looking at all of this, and he says, where's the mayor? Where's the leadership in this town? And the divine says something to Avram like, I'm glad you notice, Lech lecha. Meaning one reason, according to this Midrash, why God chose Avram is because Avram woke up to the suffering in his world. Not just the idolatry. The idolatry stands for something else. You might say idolatry in the mind of the Bible and the rabbis stands for great ideological confusion. It stands for the tendency to worship something that is not God, some, you might say, minor imitation of divine love, just truth, or beauty, because to actually apprehend the divine mind is so complex and so very overwhelming that we would rather reduce ourselves to something that we can control, something that we find manageable. So Abraham sees all of this, and he says, where's the leadership? And God says, I've chosen you because you're not mistaking an idol for the true divine. You're not mistaking an aspect of God for the plenitude of the divine. Well, Moses is, in a sense, the opposite of Avram, because God says to Moses, you've seen what's going on. You were in Egypt. You lost your mind and murdered a person, from my perspective, maybe an innocent person. So you know what's happening here. What happened to you, Moses, that I'm trying to talk to you, and all you do is resist. Now, Zornberg goes through many possibilities why Moses resists. One of hers is a midrashic tack that she takes. I think is brilliant. I just don't accept it. I don't think it explains it. I don't think it's a deep enough psychological explanation, and that his deference to his brother Aaron. Why should I be doing this? My brother Aaron, he's older. He's more distinguished. I would even say he's been there the whole time. I've not been. You should be choosing Aaron. Maybe I'm just not getting it. I'm going to put that aside. She continues the Oedipal theory in Moses' resistance in confronting Pharaoh, meaning he still has some kind of Oedipal reverence for his father, his father figure Pharaoh. Of course, the Oedipal narrative hides the desire to kill the father, which then is overlaid with the desire to respect the father. Well, I don't accept Freud, so I don't accept this either. I'm going to take it to a different level. Now, this is Finley. I didn't find this anywhere in the Midrash. I think Moses suffers from guilt of having killed the Egyptian. When we go back to that story, and it's the Egyptian man, it doesn't say he's a taskmaster, an Egyptian man, is beating a Hebrew of Moses' brethren. So Moses makes what you might say, what we would say in today's terminology, an identity argument. Since you are the other, and you're beating one of my people, one of my brethren, you must be wrong. My brother, as it were, must be right. And Moses, all the rage that he might feel, the pent-up rage, he beats the Egyptian. Then Moses finds out that everybody knows about this. So the only person who knew that Moses beat the Egyptian to death and hid the body is the man that the Egyptian was beating. The Midrash identifies this man as Datan, one of the leaders of the rebellion of Korach over in Numbers chapter 16. We learn there he's a pretty disgusting person. He's a fraud. He's not authentic. He's only interested in overturning the leadership of Moses and Pharaoh for his own nefarious purposes. That's the person that Moses saves. So when Moses says, Nohada davar, the thing is known, part of what is known in the Midrash, Moses knows that's the guy I saved, and he's an example of these people. These people aren't worthy of redemption. Now, one can make the argument that the reason Datan is this kind of a person is because of the oppression. Okay, that's possible, which means they are unfit for redemption because of the oppression. But on the other hand, we see throughout the story, there are those who are fit for redemption and those who aren't. We look at the story of the spies. Well, 10 of the 12 spies did not want to go into Canaan. You might say they were not fit for redemption. But 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, they were fit for redemption. They did not want to defy the instruction to go into the land of Canaan. When the civil war broke out there, just as we have a civil war break out at Mount Sinai, there are many people that stand with Moses and Aaron and God against those who don't want to accept Torah, against those, and again, in all the rebellions throughout the story. And remember, the rebellion is one of the great motifs of the Torah narrative, is people not wanting to accept what God wants out of them. They don't have any doubt there is God. It's not that they don't know what God wants out of them. They're just saying no. And we find this continuously through the story. There are those that say yes, and there are those that say no. So again, this is my midrashic interpretation. When Moses realizes that his brethren are not the idealized brethren that he had when he came out of Pharaoh's palace and he saw the oppression, maybe he had this idea that all oppressed are virtuous, and therefore all the Egyptians are evil. He kills an Egyptian, suddenly finds out Datan was not virtuous. Who knows who this Egyptian was? Now, the Midrash makes up a story to make the Egyptian evil. But let's put that story aside. It's a brilliant Midrashic tradition. But I'm offering a different Midrashic tradition, and I'm offering a different explanation of Moses' resistance, which is his guilt. His not being fit, again, this is in my mind, and because I think it's such a awful thing that Moses has done, I don't imagine this going out of Moses' head. I don't imagine he can forget that he murdered somebody, that he murdered possibly, maybe not a righteous person, but not an evil person, that he saved somebody. We don't know if the Egyptian was beating the Israelite to death, but he saved somebody, as the Midrash says, excuse me for saying it, who might have deserved a beating. Maybe he did something really horrible to this Egyptian. The Egyptian had no other recourse but to beat the man. Now, this is all my Midrash. So part of my Midrash on Moses is his inner oppression. And one reason now I'll continue with my paradigm on Moses. One reason people can't hear, part of them is their evaluation of themselves, who they are, what they're capable of, and many people don't even know their inner blocks to a life of dignity, other than something inside of them seems to be saying secretly, you're not worthy. You're not worthy of this. You can't be the person for whom this hour requires of you. Remember, we see this in the book of Esther, where seemingly Esther does not want to take on this great responsibility of risking her life to confront Ahasuerus. And Mordecai says, and I believe it's in Esther either 4:4 or 4:14, who knows that you weren't created for just this moment? Meaning Mordecai saying to Esther, you are the person. You were brought in life for precisely this moment. There is nobody else. And whatever you're thinking that's stopping you from doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're getting in the way of your mission, your purpose. So Moses seems to be resisting this idea continuously. Now, as far as the people, why do the people resist? Now, one can say the people are so beaten down, and we have an indication of that in our Torah portion today, something that we've spoken about many times. I just want to repeat this to you. Moses is trying to get the people to accept the idea that there's going to be redemption. The problem is it's not going to be easy, which means the minute Moses announces to Pharaoh that the redemption is on the way, Pharaoh makes their work harder. Now, I just want to think of anybody, all of you here. The minute you decide, I can no longer be the person I've been, whatever's going on with you, okay? Whether it's some kind of procrastination, not getting on with the work that you need to do, whether it's some quality you have. I know for many people, I just have to say a regular counseling session I have, a regular feature in my class is when I make my argument for reduce criticizing, complaining, condemning, and conflict. And a person says, but, and they tell me about their annoying spouse, child, or somebody else. When a person tells me the reasons for their judgmentalism, and I listen and I say, you'll remember this, we're not talking about them. We're talking about what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to mortgage the dignity of your inner life to what other people do? Do you want to mortgage the dignity of your life to who you were? Whatever caused you to be this way. Are you a function of your past, or are you a function of your destiny? Are you a function of choices you made before, or are you a function of the choice you're making today? So the paradigm of Moses, I've seen it my whole life with myself, everybody I know, every counseling client that I've known, and every class that I'm teaching, I've seen this archetype of Moses. I can't do it. What about other people? I'm not fit. The voice of resistance calls out. And here's the most amazing thing. There are some people that I will say, they'll talk about this annoying other person, this person whom they've judged, this person with whom they're holding in a harsh sense of being insufficient. And I will say, well, A, you don't know their story. You don't know what's going on inside of them. You don't know if you're overreacting. So how about just stop with the criticism? See what happens. Stop with the complaining. Stop with the condemnation, either expressed or internal. Do you want to be the person who carries around in your heart judgmentalism, condemning other people? I'm not saying we don't have to draw strong moral boundaries, but they don't have to get all the way to the core of your being. Yes, we do have to negotiate a difficult world, but we don't have to have the habit of carrying judgmentalism in our hearts, which is the resistance of most people to growth, judgmentalism about themselves, judgmentalism about other people. It's hard to know why Moses is resisting. It's hard to know why the people are resisting, but Zornberg points out, as does the Sfat Emet, as does the rabbinic tradition, points out to one phrase. I'll take it to you now. It should be very familiar to you. Let's see. Someone will remind me of the exact verse. I might be in last week's Torah portion, that the people could not hear Moses because of kotzer ruach and avodah kasha. They couldn't hear him because of kotzer ruach, limited spirit, and the hard work. The Sfat Emet takes us right back to the creation story, Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Now there it uses the word neshama, that God blew a breath of life into the human being, and the Adam, the human being, became a nefesh chaya. So there's a sense that we have a neshama. The word neshama sometimes is expressed as a ruach, which almost means the same thing. We talk about ruach Adam, the spirit, the breath of the human being. So from a Hasidic perspective, the people can't listen because their souls have been restricted, because something's happened in them where they have been, as it were, soul diminished. I would say their humanity has been diminished. Their own sense of mission and purpose have been diminished. Their own sense of the nobility they can achieve in thoughts, feelings, emotion, speech, and action has been diminished. We fall back to old patterns, meaning the people know eventually what's going to be asked of them. They know where the release of slavery is going. They know they are headed, instinctively, they're headed to Mount Sinai. They know they're going to have to change their lives. They know they're going to have to stop drinking. They know they're going to have to start to watch their words, to actually watch how their mind thinks. They realize they're going to be accountable and responsible. So what is the avodah kasha? Again, this is my drash. The avodah kasha is the work to which each of us is being called when we have our own Mount Sinai. The incredible, difficult work of human transformation. It is difficult work. You have to daily work on how you think, how you feel, how you emote, how you speak, and how you behave. Mostly how you think, how you feel. Those are the origins of transformation. You know, I remember speaking to someone many years ago. I believe it was in one of my wisdom classes on the one of our great paths is the path of holy words. And we spent a whole unit in wisdom work studying a Hasidic text on the transformative power of meditating on holy words. We find this in the Baal Shem Tov's treatment of prayer. It's something that we focus on all the time, is the meditation on holy words. And when we move into the core, into the spark of holy words, and we allow them, they can transform us. Now, this is different from reading. This is different from mastery. I mean, there are professors of Kabbalah who are not good people. There are professors of Shakespeare who are not good people. So mastering the text does not mean that the holy word has, as it were, taken root within you, and like the light of God in the human soul, has generated light through you and has been a source of transformation. So people who are new to this ask, well, how is it that now that I understand virtue, meaning how to restrain our speaking, our behaving, and ultimately how our inner life works, person says, I'm really on the rationality thing. I do want to think more clearly about my needs, expectations of other people. I do want to do a wisdom practice of regulating my inner life. How do I get to depth? So sometimes I will say to a person, now, most people don't answer this way. But in my life, I've had people say to me, I've said, what do you remember loving the greatest book when you were in your teens and 20s? Wow, I really don't remember anything now that you mention of it. I know I studied things, nothing comes to mind. I said, well, what do you read now? Well, mostly business books, things on my profession. So I'm reading lots of things on, and they'll give me whatever their work is. And sometimes I'll ask a person, well, did you study literature in high school, in college? Person says, I know I did. I just don't remember. Rabbi, I'm just blocking. Now, this is sometimes in a class in front of people. I say, is it okay? Do you mind? They go, no, this is really incredible. And everybody's listening because everybody's identifying. I had one person say, I took advanced, English literature, and I just, I know I studied some Shakespeare. Rabbi, I feel I'm blocking right now. I said, well, it's natural. I did ask, and you put yourself on the spot, and I just want to say, I'll just take a deep breath, and I want you to remember, take a pause, just remember something you read, or a great television program, great cinema, anything that you've taken in. Try to go back to the moment, a moment of depth, where something spoke through to you. And I think if we all just pause for a moment, now that I sit here and think, I remember in many great moments in literature, many moments in great television, great cinema, poetry, and so forth. I can feel it start to bubble up within me. And the idea that we should make study time, and of course I love the world of Jewish study, but any literature study, any poetry, and even we want to go to great television and movies, is to find the moment when to pause, to sink in and ask, why is this touching my soul? And once you can recover that moment of depth, the moment of death ideally wells up within us, and that affects how we regulate our inner lives and move out of bad qualities, bad habits into noble ones, into good ones, moves us up into a rational understanding of our lives, the needs and shoulds we put on ourselves and other people. It leads us up to virtue. Now, one reason we can't get down to depth is because our lives are filled with so much noise, okay? Meaning the avodah kasha of distraction. Every single day will be filled with things to distract you from your work. Why? Because inner work is the hardest work. Inner work is the most difficult work. Inner work, the inner work of moving from virtue down to depth and depth up to virtue and constantly through the cycle, it's difficult to stay in depth and have depth be transformative of your inner life, of how your mind works and how you behave, and how you behave sinks down to depth. So when I think of kotzer ruach, I think of a chronic problem that I see, and again, I start with myself and then other people, a limited humanity because of distraction. Our limited humanity because of distraction. So my paradigm of Moses is, and again, I'm thinking Zornberg for deeply filling out the psychological paradigm of Moses, but then of course I have to take her teaching and apply it to myself and my long life of being invited into the inner lives of other people, and that is Moses's inner impediment of being unfit. There's also despair, and it's not lack of trust. As when a person says, well, I promised you, don't you trust me? And the person over here can have the feeling of, there's something wrong with you that you don't believe me, as if it's on some kind of conscious level, as opposed to an inability, as opposed to an inner blockage. What it means to transfer on to another person reliability when their life has been filled with so much grief and so many wrong roads taken, that the person who says, I will redeem you, I will bring you out of here, the inner instinctive, inner life habitual response says, yeah, you and everybody else. I've heard this before. It's not that I don't believe you. I don't believe anything. I don't believe anybody. And even if it does come through, it might not change me that much. This is also one of the deepest things that I've seen, is that even moments where another person does bring to another person authentic love and service, it's not that the love is not authentic enough. It's not that the acts of service are not true enough. Is that the person has a block of receiving it. Now, I've seen this in beginners in counseling where the person says, my spouse makes me feel, my parents make me feel, other people make me feel. I say, yeah, it's true enough. I understand people trigger us. But the question is, are your feelings only a function of what other people do and say? Or are your feelings, your thoughts, also reflective of your habits, and it doesn't matter what anybody else will do or say because you're addicted to those thoughts. You're addicted to those feelings. So I see Moses and the Israelites, as it were, being functions of deformed inner lives. And therefore, the redemption is not defeating the Egyptians and lifting them out of Egypt, taking them out Sinai. How do we know this? Because it actually doesn't work. This is the great wisdom of the Torah. It's not that they weren't redeemed from Egypt. It's not work that God couldn't be trusted. It's that it didn't make any difference. To most of the people, it did not make any difference. This is the frightening underlife, as it were, of the portion. And when we study every moment here where the people actually, no matter what happens on the outside, they have moments of transcendence. They have moments of epiphanies. For example, at the end of Exodus 14, where they believe Moses and God and they trust him, and then very soon after that, it goes away. Now, what about the image of Pharaoh? Just a few words on Pharaoh. As Moses confronts Pharaoh the first time, and the example of the staff and the tanin, I think, is a psychologically deep one. Now, remember, we don't know who wrote this story. I think it's clear that the tanin, the crocodile, is a reference back to Genesis 1:20. The tanin in 1:20 standing for all the antecedent mythologies, especially the Babylonian myth, where the created world actually came out of a rotten sea monster. So in the tohu vavohu, the chaos, which was antecedent of God's creating light, I think is actually something of a euphemism for the Babylonian myth that the world is born out of the rotting corpse of a sea monster. So the tanin has a sense of not just a crocodile, but ancient Babylonian mythology. A crocodile is bad enough. When you think of the reptilian crocodile, we at least for me, I look at a crocodile, I don't see a sentient being. Now I know crocodiles might say, look, I didn't ask to be born this way. I didn't ask to be born ugly and frightening. I'm just hungry like everybody else. Now, when a crocodile's hungry, it's frightening. When a hummingbird is hungry, we're not so frightened. They're both just animals. So it's what we bring to the crocodile. We create of the crocodile not just another evolved being with a tiny little brain and all it wants to do is survive and mate and be safe and have food and fight off attackers. We project onto the crocodile some of our worst fantasies about the evils in the world. So Pharaoh, because you look in Ezekiel, he's analogous to the crocodile, which means, again, this is I'm not, I don't know much about life creatures, but I don't imagine that the inner life of the crocodile is that much different from the inner life of any other reptile, okay? But what we project onto it. So to project onto Pharaoh, the crocodile, you might say it's pure appetite. It's pure ugliness. It's all teeth and danger. This is I think, the image. It's all frightening. It's all destructive. It's the image of evil. Now, in the Babylonian mythology, that's where the world is born from. It's not God speaking light into the chaos. That's the birthplace of the world. So I think one of the stories that Pharaoh is the tanin, is the crocodile in the Nile. And in this story, when Aaron turns his staff into a crocodile, says, I'm in charge of crocodiles. Crocodiles don't rule us. I can turn my staff into a crocodile and turn the crocodile right back into a staff. So the Egyptian necromancers and magic workers throw their crocodile. Of course, Aaron and Moses' crocodile eats up Pharaoh's crocodile, which says, we control that world. That world doesn't control us. Interestingly, when God speaks to Moses and Moses' staff, God says to Moses, your staff, which became a nachash. He doesn't even say, now it's the same staff that Aaron turned into a crocodile. With Moses, it turned into a nachash. And a nachash is bad enough. But remember, later on in the Torah, the nachash is an agent of healing. Of course, the nachash over in... okay, thank you for that. Someone just put that in the chat. Can you all see it? That's great. The nachash, in the Garden of Eden story, is is a complex agent that moves people on into their lives. So what is Pharaoh? Pharaoh is the person who does not want to accept that things will change, does not want to accept that his world is over, and his imperviousness to the truth brings utter destruction down to his people. Now, I'm going to appeal to a bit of history here, very tragic history, and that's when again, I hope you don't mind that I bring this up. In my studies of the Second World War, there's a moment when in 1942, when the Japanese High Command knew they weren't going to win the war, and even the emperor, by the end of 1942, they realized it's over for us. The United States is getting back on their feet, and we're not going to win. They kept the war going until August of 1945, as you knew. Same thing in Germany. after the Battle of Stalingrad from 1942 to 1943, the German high command knew the war was over. The Allies had taken over North Africa. They were on their way into Sicily and into into Italy. The Russians were pushing back. The German high command knew it was over. And of course, you look at the Japanese high command, by the way, who committed a genocide in China that we don't talk about much, which was greater than the genocide of the Jews, which was greater than the murders that happened in Poland and Ukraine. People estimate at least 20 million Chinese were murdered or sentenced to inevitable deaths by the Japanese war machine, and they knew it was over. And there were people that said, "Let's send out peace feelers because this is going to destroy us." But you look at you look at the Nazis, you look at the Japanese. They knew it was over, but their sense of self would be destroyed if they accepted it. Many people say that's what's happening to Putin today with the invasion of the Ukraine. He seems to be AWOL. I'm not sure what's happening there, but many people say his idea of the greater Russia has been destroyed in one way or the other. But why do people hold on? Why does the war keep going? Because for Pharaoh, as the archetype of the evil leader who leads his people into destruction, they can't let go, because to let go would destroy their identity. Now, and there have been these unspeakable evil leaders throughout history, whose empires have in general fallen, not in time. They went on far too long. Now, taking that horrible metaphor of the fascist, destructive leader who will not understand reality and not sue for peace, because they actually don't care about the number of human beings who are dying every single day. There were certain times in World War II where there were 30,000 people dying a day, if you can include the Chinese theater with the European theater. At the end of World War II, in the invasion of Germany, there were probably 20,000 people dying a day between the Soviets and the Germans. Can you imagine? 20,000 young men dying every single day for a 3-4 month period, only because one side would simply not accept that it was over. Then we look at the human being. Again, lahavdil. I don't want to say that we are anything like that, only in the most distant sense of there's something in us that says this old way of living is over. It's over. It's untenable. I can't take this into my future. I can't die like this. With these emotions, these thoughts, these feelings, whatever I'm going to do on the outside, I don't want to go into my grave like this. Whatever the 60 halachot is of the grave in a plowed field, I don't want to end up there like this. So that's one idea of the paradigm of Pharaoh consciousness that I want to use today, is the person who's shut down because they actually can't believe that this is over. And something in them, a very perverse side of them, says, I'd rather die like this than admit reality. Now that is the Sitra Achra. Those are destructive forces. That's a Yetzer Hara saying, I'd rather die like this than do the avodah kasha, the hard work of moving myself into the future. So this is where that line from the Sfat Emet, rooted in the Kabbalah, meant so much to me. And that's where it says, the reason there were 10 plagues in Egypt, because as it were, the divine had to break through 10 levels of the grip of the Sitra Achra and break each one down with horrible plagues, horrible makot strikes against Egypt to get to the point where you might say that the exiled word of God had a chance to get out. It's very difficult. It's a painful process to look at yourself and, as it were, have parts of yourself die away so a new self can be reborn. So, and just the last is, and we'll talk about this more another time, you might say the trauma of the divine that we see in full force at Mount Sinai, where, arguing against this idea of divine omnipotence. I mean, there is no divine omnipotence hardly anywhere in the Bible. Now and there, an odd reference. But mostly the Bible is about the lack of divine omnipotence, and even more so, as Zornberg mentions, the trauma of God. The trauma of God in Genesis 6, where God says, Kol yetzer machshavot libo rak ra kol hayom. All the shape of the human being's inner life are all bad all day long. God destroys humanity, saves Noah and his family. It all goes wrong again. The divine tries to give us a teaching, a Torat Adonai Timimah, a whole teaching for every human being. And you might say God watches aghast, astounded, traumatized, that the Dibur, the word of God, won't settle into human beings and take root and have us grow into conscious, virtuous people, as we said last night, who love even when it's out of fashion within ourselves and other people. So Moses has his paradigm of resistance. You'll study Zornberg and others and find out what paradigm makes sense for you. The people have their paradigm of resistance. Again, it's a paradigm that we have to fill in from our own studies, from how we see ourselves, people that we know. Pharaoh is a certain kind of paradigm of resistance. Again, we have to fill that in. I've given you my interpretation. And then, of course, the paradigm of the divine, the heartbroken, as it were, impotent divine, not powerful enough to transform us because of God's will and word. The Kabbalah, this has come to understand. God, the spark might come from the divine. The husk is the reality. Only we can break the husk and release the divine, the spark, release the divine dibur, the divine word, from the galut, from its exile in Egypt.